As we both know, computer technologies have been an inescapable part of life. At some point during your day, you will interact with, your smartphone, laptops, printers, maybe your mom's iPad, all types of different technologies, even a smartphone or a smartwatch, I mean. And, these are computer hardwares, softwares. It could be data created by a computer or manipulated by a computer or all types of different variants of those points. We're going to be talking about two different types of computer software. And because computer technologies are being grown and developed by a wide array of individuals every day. So due to divergent philosophies about computer technology, we have two different parallel developments of computer technologies. And these can be classified as open source and closed source. Now, open source means that the source code is included in the distribution of the software, and it may be read or modified by the users. If you're a gamer, if you play video games, some games you can create modifications to and modify the heck out of it. Other games you can't do that at all. So a game that you could heavily modify, that could be compared to an open source software. Whereas a game that you can't modify would be closed source. Closed source means that the source code is not provided with the software. This is usually so that the creator can monetize their software, as well as prohibit the redistribution of their software. Let's talk about some examples that you might recognize. Closed source is Microsoft, Apple, Cisco, whereas open source can be GNU, Linux, Mozilla. Now let's talk about FOSS and floss. Two different types of dance moves. When discussing open source, two distinct terms come up: free open source software and free libre open source software. These terms kind of mean the same thing, but floss was used as a method of preventing the confusion about the word free. The floss movement can be best summarized as the freedom to use, modify, and distribute software at the user's discretion. This kind of means the software isn't free. It still costs money to use, but it's free in the sense that you as a user are free to modify it and use it to whatever you need it for. So now that we got the introduction out of the way of what we're going to be talking about, let's talk about the contents of this course. We're going to be delving into GNU Linux environments, specifically with CentOS and Ubuntu, with the purpose of teaching you how to navigate and use Linux for basic tasks. And this is great for Linux administration. Let's talk about the origin, a little bit of history. You don't have to memorize any of this. Let's just get into some story time. Grab your popcorn. GNU developed in 1984. The goal of this project was to develop a complete free operating system. By 1991, Linus Torvalds started to develop the Linux kernel. He re-released his kernel as an open source in 1992 under the GNU GPL. Linux as we know it today began with the GNU project and the ideals it had for floss. Linus Torvalds contributed to this project, and it eventually blossomed into the Linux ecosystem we saw today, which is huge and ever evolving. What are the benefits of GNU Linux? It has a variety of strengths that it can bring to the computer technology. The largest strengths can be broken down to scalability, security, flexibility, and let's discuss how these strengths are achieved and what it does for companies and how it makes you a better system admin if you know how to do this stuff. The Linux kernel is written mostly in C, with some platform-specific code written in assembly language. One of the benefits of C is that it uses resources more efficiently at runtime than other alternatives. When started, the kernel will load only the individual modules it requires. This allows the kernel to minimize the RAM it uses. Every process in GNU Linux is associated with the user. This ensures that all software run on a computer is bound to a user's rights and privileges. This means that as long as good practices are followed, malicious software can only affect that user's data and processes, instead of affecting everything on the computer, such as the kernel. Almost every Linux distribution can have an individual packages installed and configured to make it viable for any role that someone may require. Web servers, mail servers, file servers, client machines, and almost any other service that you can imagine is represented in the FOSS community somewhere. These software packages and support for open standards also means that Linux can be integrated into so many different environments where other non-similar operating systems wouldn't function properly together. It just integrates seamlessly in a way that other things like Mac or Windows operating systems wouldn't do. And funny enough, Microsoft, the Azure cloud, is mostly made up of Linux virtual machines, not Windows. So Microsoft themselves also know this. Now that we've discussed the beauty and the design found in Linux, we should discuss the benefits that FOSS and FLOSS community enjoys because of its open source nature. One of the benefits of using GNU Linux is that the source code for both GNU and Linux is available to anyone who wants to see, use, modify, or redistribute it. The only protection provided to this code is known as the GNU General Public License, and you can visit it at this page right here where I dropped the link. This license is designed to protect open source softwares from inexplicably becoming closed source and losing all of the ideals and rights the developer wanted to convey with the software. Meaning that you can edit and redistribute a Linux operating system any way you want it, as long as your redistribution is still open source and not closed source. And the license, while providing great benefit to Linux distributions, it can also lead to one of its greatest hurdles. There are many different choices to GNU Linux. This can lead to analysis paralysis, which is essentially a big buzzword in the community, and it's the inability to make a meaningful choice due to too many options being available. And what I mean by too many options unavailable, let's do a quick Google search. To show you what I mean by too many options, this is the list of every Linux distribution, or all the ones registered in this website anyways. So as you can see, every single one of these dots is a Linux distribution. It's a different choice for you to make when installing Linux. And as you can see, there are endless amounts. So, going back to our slide, there's a lot of choices. And with Linux distributions, there are a variety of distributions you can explore. As you saw with my big, extensive list, there's Debian, Slackware, Red Hat. So let's talk a little bit about CentOS, where it came from, and what's the deal with it. CentOS begins with Red Hat software. Red Hat was one of the pioneers of Linux and developed and sold support for the FOSS that it provided. Red Hat Linux still uses this revenue model, providing their OS at no cost, making their living by providing support. So you would subscribe to user support or enterprise support instead of selling the licenses for money. So Red Hat slowly began to focus on stability with their RHEL distribution. It would release less updates to ensure stability of servers. And besides that, they provided a more quickly evolving operating system on the side to everyday users. They developed a regular version called Fedora, and that was optimized for desktop and laptop hardware instead of servers. The open source community sought a middle ground and enterprise OS. That would work well with servers, and that would provide a greater degree of flexibility in updates for those who decided not to pay for the support of Red Hat. This led to the whole inception of the community enterprise operating system, CentOS. CentOS is built off of the most recent build of Red Hat Enterprise and sacrifices some stability for additional flexibility as updates are more regular. CentOS is essentially an enterprise operating system for companies that can't or won't pay for Red Hat support contracts. So let's compare GNU Linux to Windows. So for Windows, you have to purchase a software and a license. The support is free with a valid software license or partnership. The focus is on backwards compatibility and software support. Microsoft defines that what can and what cannot be done with the operating system. So there's a fine line of what you can do with Windows and what you can't. But Linux, on the other hand, you can purchase a software or a license or support, or you can do all of that for free. And the focus is more on optimal design and resource usage according to need. And software can be developed and modified at a user discretion. So that means Where Microsoft has a fine line of what it can and cannot do, Linux kind of blurs that line. It depends on how you edit the code, how you reconfigure the kernel, what kind of operating system flavor you're using, and there's many different factors that come into play on what a Linux can do and what it can't do. Windows provides administrators and users an operating system that is largely configured and deployed according to what Microsoft believes is best. And they aren't always correct because it is designed to attempt to eliminate obscure information and highlight important configuration changes that are commonly used. A typical Windows behavior is to prevent users from configuring basic values incorrectly, whereas the GNU Linux allows administrators and users complete control to optimize and configure systems as they desire. Linux trusts that the individuals using their softwares know a little bit about what they're doing when they're configuring their server settings. So there's a question, which is better? And this question is best answered by individual situations. In my experience, however, by answering other simple questions, you can determine what is correct. Can you support Linux? If no, use Windows. Can you obtain the vendor support needed? No, use Windows. Is there any negative or repercussions to using Linux for the solution instead of Windows? If no, then use Linux. I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope you found some value in what I had to offer today, and I'd like to thank you for watching.